And hello, everyone. Welcome back again to the Unseen Journey. I'm your host, Guy, joined with our special guest today, Cheryl. Cheryl, how are you doing today?
I am terrific. How are you?
I'm doing awesome. Just so everybody can do me a big favor, if this is your first time joining us, reach down there, hit the like and subscribe button. We got lots of content. We're coming at you every week with a new episode. If you haven't caught some of our past episodes, please do. Just all kinds of cool different people on the podcast. We've got some guests that'll be returning. Cheryl, for example, is going to be with us a couple different times, actually, which is going to be really cool because you've got like a whole kit bag. And without kind of like spoiling it all for you, what are kind of some of the different like hats and umbrellas that you kind of wear when it comes to working in the veteran space? And gosh, I guess just the general education space too. Go ahead, please.
Let's start at the beginning. I'm a daughter of the Navy. Okay. My dad was in the Navy 30 years. Embarrassingly enough, husband number one was in the Navy. Husband number two was not in the Navy, the Army. Husband number two is in the Army. So, you know, I've been around the Army. Military is kind of my second language.
That's a great way to phrase it too. The military is a second language because it really does have its own dialogue. Please
I have worked as a self-defense instructor for 15 years, rape aggression defense. I worked with women and children. I have taught family programs for the Department of Defense for about 7 years. I worked on a research study for post-deployed families for about 5 years. And I also have taught yoga for 11 years on Fort Liberty, and I specialized. Wow. So in yoga, you have a 200-hour certification and another 300-hour in which you focus. It's like having a master's degree. You have that focus on a specific topic in mind, of course, is trauma. And now I work in hospice. Nice. So I'm kind of, and
oh, wow.
I absolutely love it. And I think everything I've done in my life has led me to the point where I can be in the present moment with people who are facing that their last challenge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So I'm kind of curious. I kind of want to jump in and talk about, your experiences kind of working with post-deployment families. And I think you said 7 years of kind of doing some of that work on Liberty, which, for me, back in my day, right? Like Fort Bragg. And it's always going to be Fort Bragg to me, right? That's where I started my career and that's where I retired. So I'm married to it. But tell us a little bit more, because that really sounds interesting. I know from personal experiences, it'd probably be ultimate challenge, not only to my marriage, but I'm going to say like in my adult life, right? And that might sound a little weird. However, I'm a big believer, we've had the question posed before, like, what is your legacy going to be? What do you want on your tombstone? And I've always said, like, hey, just throw my ashes wherever. I don't really care, because my legacy and my tombstone is my kids and my grandkids. And as long as they have like good, positive things to say about me, then I was successful. Like I achieved what I wanted to, right? But I'm kind of curious. Tell us a little bit about the post-deployment family and some of the programs you were doing.
You'll hear me quote Abigail or Abby Gewertz, Dr. Gewertz. She founded the adaptive parenting post-deployed families. I just messed that whole thing up. But anyway, so she, it's all good.
It's all cool.
But what she did with us, or the parents through her parenting program, was had them sit and just kind of take a breath, kind of go into themselves, and she would have them looking at their 80th birthday party. And in that 80th birthday party, their kids stand up and they tell everybody in the audience who their parents were and what did they learn from those parents. And of course, we're all crying because we're picturing this, we're living this in our minds. And when we opened our eyes, she asked us to write those things down. What did those kids say? Because those are now going to be your family values. So when push comes to shove, what does this family stand on? And even if you have to put it on a big, huge Post-it note and put it in the dining room, so every day you're seeing these are the values. Is it education? Is it helping each other? Is it building on understanding? You know, what are those values that you're going to come back to every time? So Dr. Gewertz, I worked with her. I worked with curriculums with Dr. Phelan, with Hal Runkle. There's a bunch of different curriculums that the Army works with. And I've been able to teach a lot of those curriculums and really help parents, because you parent the way you were parenting, but you are going to
for sure
parent through the eyes of a child, because you were watching your parents parent you, but you were a kid. So you're like, well, I'm never going to make my kid go through anything hard. I'm never going to make my kid, like, I always had to make coffee for my dad. It's like, I'm never going to make no frickin' coffee. I'm not going to make my kids make me coffee because I hated that. Well, that's looking at that from a child's perspective. But children learn from making mistakes. So how can we make this a safe place to fail? Mm-hmm. And that, for parents, fear is what's going to drive us to not let your kids fail. Well, what are you afraid of? You looking bad? Or allowing your kid to fail in front of people? Of course, wait, that makes you look bad. So that's how we as humans learn, period. We learn through failing and fixing it. And how bad did that just suck? And how can I get better? So a lot of those curriculums are kind of looking at parenting from that adult perspective. And so it's not that how bad are you doing parenting, it's how can we help you learn something from an adult perspective. Yeah.
Absolutely. Because we don't know what we don't know, right? And man, as you were talking, like just like all these different thoughts just bouncing into my head. And I'm doing so bad today. I'm like remembering like names and references. However, I'm going to give this one. It was a TED Talk and a lady gave it. And it was this concept about how we as society are raising girls incorrectly. And I just want to use it to highlight kind of this idea that you were bringing up about parenting, right? And some of the information she was citing was the fact that oftentimes we parent girls in a way that kind of pushes them and lends them towards being risk or failure adverse. And with boys, oftentimes we'll just be like, well, just go out and play. Just go join the sports team. Just go try. Oh, you're fine. Right. And what she was kind of showing was like, you know, by the time a lot of girls, young ladies have made it to college, the number of times they've been willing to just try something, fail and learn is it's a very low number of how many times they've been willing to do that because of the way they were parented and raised. Whereas boys get to college and they're not scared at all. They're like, oh, I might try to start this company, and if it fails, like whatever, I'll end up back on the couch and I'll figure it out and I'll go get another job, right? And so I think it's interesting how you're talking about that idea of making a safe space to kind of take those risks, have that opportunity for failure, and then from that failure, have that growth and that learning them. And I think that's really cool.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And, you know, as we had been talking, I think a lot of feelings that we have are based off of fear. And are we courageous enough as adults to drill into that? And how can we get curious enough? Do we allow ourselves the ability to drill down in and get curious about, boy, that sucked. Okay, let me do that self-reflection. And, you know, as I have worked with a lot of soldiers over the years, when people go through a hard time or trauma, I should say trauma, because going through a hard time is a hard time, but trauma is different. And after you've gone through trauma, being alone with yourself isn't safe. I've asked soldiers to close their eyes to do a breath practice, and they're just like, oh, hell no, I'm not doing that. And their eyes are wide open, and I'll have to tell them, I can see behind you. I got your sticks. I'm right here. I'm not going to let your buddy wet willy you. I'm on it, you know? And so you're safe. And I would have to go and say, there's a closet there. It's empty. If you need to look at it first to be safe to close your eyes, because when you've gone through hard things, being alone with you it's a circus, and it's an unsafe circus. And so asking somebody to be able to look at something from a different perspective, and they're holding on for dear life at that point just to get through the day, that it's, you know, knowing your audience. Are you safe? Do you feel safe? Can you take this breath with me? And sometimes if your kids are used to you going off the chain about whatever, they don't feel safe with you. And so,
for sure.
So I know we're walking all over the place, but yeah.
And you're great. You're great. And, you know, it's just, such a great conversation. I was thinking about a couple different things. The one I'm going to pull in though is, you know, at the ORW retreats, being a team leader for couples, one of the things we bring up is this idea of not necessarily like people having, you know, like what do I want to say, like weaknesses or faults or things of that nature. Instead, saying like we have blind spots, right? It's an analogy every adult can get. Because you get behind the wheel of a car, vehicles have blind spots, right? And it's not necessarily that if I'm driving, I can see what's in those blind spots. However, if I get with someone like you or a clinician, I'm trying not to say spouse. I mean, yeah, spouses can let you know there are blind spots there. However, that gets into some different stuff. If we can have that person though, like you're doing for them, like, hey, like I can see the door. There's nothing in the closet. You can close your eyes. I'm covering all your blind spots, right? Then it allows us to go to this really, really challenging and scary place where it's like, okay, that mirror is coming up. Now I'm going to have to look in that mirror. I'm actually going to have to like own who I am, which leads to that next question of like, well, okay, well, who do I want to be? And in this situation, it's, okay, well, what kind of a parent am I? And what kind of a parent do I want to be? And that leads me back to my other thought, because when you were talking about the idea of us closing our eyes as parents and we're 80 and our kids are standing up talking about us, if I back up and I go into my, you know, dark cloud and storm days when I wasn't healthy, my PTSD was really high, you know, really quick to anger, rage, yelling, all those things that are associated negatively with trauma and PTSD. Because if we have pain, oftentimes we're just giving off pain, right? Man, if my kids had to stand up and that was still who I was today, I don't know, you know, and for me, you know, so my mom died when I was a good bit younger due to vehicular manslaughter, right? So, you know, cops filed it. It was deemed, it was a murder, right?
That's rough.
And I was the one person, for sure. And I was the one person who like stood up at her funeral, and I'll never forget because, you know, the Pastor Mike Bailey was like, hey, does anyone want to say anything before we close out? And I'm sitting there, you know, we're all crying, and I'm kind of looking around, and like, I can see like there's no movement. My sisters, like they are just beyond frozen. And my gut thought was like, there's no way in hell that I'm not going to stand up and say something on my mom's behalf, right? And not to make myself sound like a horrible, terrible person. However, if you ask me that 80-year question about my dad, based on some of his parenting techniques and life experiences with my dad, I mean, I'd probably stand up and I'd probably be very to the point. I'd say like, yep, he was my dad.
Yeah, bullet pointed out.
You know, right?
That's all I got. Yep.
Right. Yep. That's it. Yep. We're ending this one on a positive note. There it is.
Yeah. And I like what you're saying about the bullet points.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry, about the blind spots, because with
blind spots. Yeah.
Blind spots aren't a character fail, and everybody has them. So giving yourself that permission to have a blind spot, and you're just like, yeah, I know it's over there.
Yeah.
I'm not ready for it, but I know it's there. And that's that self-discovery. But you have to be okay with you first to even open up the door to self-discovery. And how far am I away from trauma to have self-exploration? So I wanted to run back a little bit in time to about 20 something years ago, and how I went from oblivious to trauma, besides childbirth, to where I am now. So 2001, this is in October 2001, and it's a month after 9/11. And we're outside Fort Hood, which is now Fort Cavassus. I'm not sure. I hope I did that right, because I want to be. I want to be respectful for that. Yeah, the one in Texas.
The one in Texas.
So I am going to the gym. It's late. I went to work. I wanted to go to the gym. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to the gym. I get from the gym, I'm going to the grocery store, because you're always going to the grocery store. So I call the husband on the phone and say, hey, listen, I'm running into the Albertsons. I'm getting this and this. What else do I need to grab while I'm in there? So I'm in the store, and of course I've got the gallon of milk. And you remember when we used to have the dish detergent, that's the big block, that's just this huge thing, entity. Yeah, and it weighs about 10 pounds, whatever it was.
Yeah.
So I've got all this stuff, and I'm carrying it back to my little Volkswagen Beetle. It was a cute little green one. And I'm all of a sudden I look up and I see these two guys, and they're looking at me. And I'm like, right away you get that feeling, right? Okay, woohoo, something's bad.
Yeah, the feeling. Yeah.
And I'm like, oh. And they looked at each other, they talked, and then they looked back at me. And I said, all right, angels, I need some help now. Audibly, out loud, asking for some help. So I get to the car, and you know how you have the little fob and you hit it and it unlocks the door. So I throw everything in, I get in the car, and I go to shut the door and then hit the button. And before I could hit the button, one of those guys opens up the door, and then he takes pepper spray, sprays my face down with the pepper spray, gets in my car, pushes me over, takes my keys, and he's trying to figure out how to start the car. But it was one of those little Volkswagen bricks, where you click it and the little pin, the thing comes out. So he's doing that. I'm freaking out. And I'm like, no. And I'm in complete panic mode. And then he goes to shut the door. And my brain goes back to a self-defense class I took 2 years beforehand. And the police officer said, if they shut the door, game's over, because now your chances of getting out of that vehicle are really slim. So he's going to go shut the door. And this is where I can't remember. I don't know. I don't know what happened in the whatever seconds it took me to get from my legs are underneath his, but my body part's on the passenger side. So somehow I get my legs out over the top of him. So now I'm sitting on the guy's lap. And I'm looking him right in the face. I said, you are not doing this to me. And I can still tell you exactly what that guy's eye looks like. So I go to put my feet down on the ground, and the other man on the outside of the door takes off running. So I put my feet down on the ground, and I'm getting ready to run. And I am complete jello. So my legs are just wobbling, and I'm screaming. And I run back into the Albertsons store. And I'm going to tell you what, Guy, I really felt that I was going to die that night. Fast forwarding, the DA's office said, oh yeah, they were going to kill you. And so when someone wants to kill you, that vibe, that feeling is very, very strong, that someone wants you dead. So I get into the store and I'm just completely freaking out, yelling. And about 2-3 minutes later, the only police officer I know in Killeen, Texas, walks inside that store, and I'm screaming. I'm like, Mike, and he's like, "Ew, God, what? What is wrong with you?" And I'm screaming, and I'm trying to tell him the story. And a couple of guys who saw it from outside walked in and said, "Hey, these 3 guys." I said, "There was only 2 guys." They said, "No, there was 3." And they ran around. They ran around the outside of the store.
Wow.
And within a few minutes, because right now I have, Pigpen from Peanuts, I have got this pepper spray just waffling off of me, and nobody really wants to stand close to me. So they make me go outside. So I'm sitting on the ground and I'm crying. And the crying just makes a pepper spray a whole different. So,
oh, yeah.
So all of a sudden you
sure.
hear these V8s, these cop cars just buzzing up and down the street, just all over the place. They're just going crazy. And I make them bring me the ambulance because I thought my face was coming off, and I had to have a mirror to show me that my skin wasn't coming off my face, because by then it's gone down your eyebrows and into your eyes.
Yeah.
And so he calls my husband and says, "Hey, listen, something just happened with your wife. We have her with you. She's safe now, but some people were trying to hurt her." And he had fallen asleep on the couch from the time I called him from the car to getting this and all this transpiring. He'd fallen asleep. He had a dream at that point that I had just been killed. So when the police officer was telling him this just happened, he gives me the phone. He goes, "I don't think he understands what I'm saying." So I pick up the phone. I said, "This just happened." And he is a mess because he's like, "I just had this dream." So the police were able to catch one guy pretty quickly. And then they got another one up the street about half a mile. And so they said, "Cheryl, get in the car. We need you to identify these folks." So the first one, I don't even know who that kid was. So we get to the second one, and instantly I'm shaking. And I'm like, that's him. And of course, my nervous system is reacting to the fact I'm seeing this guy. And the police officer goes, "Hey, April," she's another cop, and he goes, "Can you get in the car with her? I think she's really having a hard time." He's like, "Are you cold?" And I said, "I'm not cold." And April would not get in the car with me. Why? That pepper spray. She's like, "I can't come near her." She goes, "She's just lit up." So anyway, so they take me downtown. And that's when I find out that they finally caught the last guy. And then it all opens up that this was a group of guys. They were all cousins. There were 2 sets of brothers, but they were all cousins. And they were out abducting and raping women in Killeen, Texas for about 6 weeks, right after 9/11. And they had a revolver. You know what a judge looks like? One of those really giant revolvers. And they were using that. They didn't have any bullets for it at this point. So they were using it, clicking it in girls' faces, hitting them on the head with it, just being horrible. But what they did is the 2 sets of brothers, all cousins, were using the youngest one's pregnant girlfriend's car. And they would go around and find a female who was by herself. Either she was coming out of a 7-Eleven or a club, and they would follow her home, and then they would get to her house and they would box her back in her car and then take her out to the lake, and where they would all rape and abuse her. And then they would leave her by herself with her vehicle, and then they would go back. So they were doing this night after night. So by the time we've got the boys confessing, the man boys confessing, and enough people coming forward, we had 58 indictments. And that was the most in Bell County history at that time. So we had a large pattern of what was going on. And we had, when they began to tell stories, they were telling stories about cases that never came forward. And then we had other ladies that were telling stories that they didn't have enough evidence to pin on these guys. But when we went to court, there was 13 that we had enough evidence on to go ahead and prosecute. So on the night in October 2001, where they were going after me, they went after a lady a couple hours beforehand. And someone had come out of the store that she was parked in front of, and they ran. And then that's what brought them to the Albertsons, where I was. So the night of the arrests, there's 3. One's 21, one's 15, one's 14 years old. And that's because the brother and the 2 cousins didn't want to kill anybody. And they said no. So the 21-year-old who had gotten in that addiction loop of needing to create and more havoc and get a better high off what they were doing, he had bullets, live bullets in his pocket. So this was the night he was going to kill somebody. And so he got the 14 and the 15-year-old to go with him. And this is 10 o'clock at night on a weeknight. And so these kids, parents don't know where they are, of course. Anyway, so there's 6 altogether in this scenario. It was a long road, just to get to court. The 4 original 2 brothers, all cousins, they will never get out of prison. They will never. With all of the first person they abducted, and this will hit closer home to y'all, is she was a soldier. She got off duty or work late. So she went to one of those places where you take your car in and you get out and you scrub it. One guy came in one way, one guy came in the other way, boxed her in her car, took her out. But they first made her empty her bank account and blah, blah, blah. And when she and Andrea, were sitting in court, and they pulled out the judge and they put it down on the table, and she about came out of that seat. And I go, "You okay?" She goes, "I'm okay. It's okay. It's okay." I said, "That will never have to be okay. Don't even tell yourself that has to be okay. That's a lot for somebody to pull out that weapon without even telling us as the victims of this case that they're going to do that."
Yeah.
But later on, talking to her, she said she ended up deploying 3 weeks after her incident, and it was the best thing that she could have done because she was surrounded by her battle buddies, and that's what she needed. So, yeah.
Nice.
But yeah, good. Those 58 indictments, that was a lot. And one of them happened on Fort Hood. One happened on Fort Hood. A family member had dropped her husband off on the installation and then was stopped at a 7-Eleven on the way home. And they ended up taking her onto the installation in the back where all the cows are, and ended up raping her out there. And then she couldn't find her car. She got disoriented. A family on their way to church the next day found her walking down the street naked and wrapped her up and took her to Darnell, and it's the hospital there on Fort Hood. And so there's a lot to this case. I mean, there was not just mine where I had gotten out of the car and ran back in the store. That's the night they caught them all. But they wreaked a lot of havoc on a lot of people. And the juveniles were treated, went through the court system, of course, differently than the adults did. And so going through with the juvenile, and I'm telling them what's happened to me since this happened. And of course, the dreams are catastrophic. Not being able to sleep.
Oh, yeah.
Not being able to function in public. I could not get out of my car to pump gas. I could not go from the parking lot at work into the office and back out without somebody I know there. I mean, it took me a long time to be able to function in public or just go to the mailbox by myself. That wasn't going to happen. And because I would just start hyperventilating and having a hard time because what the judge said to the juvenile, because they said they were trying to rob me. And the judge said, son, you didn't just try to rob this lady. You've robbed her of a relationship with her children, a relationship with her husband, and you've robbed her with her relationship with her fellow man. And son, you don't get to do that. You don't get that. So it's the relationship with your family that is an ongoing everyday process, trying to navigate your pain, your fears, your trauma, and then try to make that okay for yourself. But I had to try to make that okay with my husband too. And because he felt like he failed because he wasn't there to fix this or to keep it from happening or to save me. And so now he's got his own scenario going on. And I'm going to tell you, the dreams are probably some of the hardest and worst things to work through because you don't know they're coming. It'll hit you like a Mack truck. And next thing you know, you're on all fours drooling and crying on the carpet. You're just rocking back and forth and you're trying to figure it out. And you're trying not to throw up. And the kids are like, Mom, and you're just like, and it was 20 years later, I had a dream, popped out of nowhere. I was teaching a class for the 16th MPs. And I guess I was just nervous enough where this percolated up. And I'm trying to get from my bedroom to the living room, and the dog just stopped right in front of me. And I had to purposely say to myself, don't kick the dog, don't kick the dog, don't, because you're so nerve-wracked. And I trained myself to do things where I put the keys on the hook, the purse on the back of the chair, to create where things were going to be where I needed them to be. So if this ever happened, which it happened enough, that I could navigate where things are, where they're supposed to be at least. So I've had that talk with a lot of spouses over the years. It's like, if your husband needs to put his blouse on the back of the chair, his keys on the hook, if he needs things dressed before he goes to bed, let him do it. Because he doesn't know what he's going to navigate overnight in the dreams. And literally you're shaking so hard that you're dropping things and you have to stop and try to get your heart rate normalized just to brush your teeth. I mean, it's just,
Yeah.
So
for sure.
all those things are huge. I mean, those are just big things. And having a system behind you that understands it. Well, a lot of soldiers do, I did not have anything that would help me understand what was happening to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And to kind of parallel that, right? Like thinking about, post-deployment and how that, like you're saying, right, you never really know how that trauma is going to kind of come to the surface or how it's going to manifest itself. And I didn't even recognize it in myself, right? One of those blind spots until many, many years later, when finally we're going through couples therapy. And Kelly's like, after that first deployment, like, I don't know if you know this, but like you would come home, you would basically lock the front door, make sure all the doors were locked, lock the bedroom door, put the dogs in the bedroom. I had a loaded pistol in my nightstand already ready to go. Like, I'm like, no joke, like bullet in the chamber. Like there was going to take no time to react. And I never processed it and never thought about it. And then even fast forward to as recently as, I think it's been maybe like 3-ish weeks now. I woke up in the middle of the night as my butt is literally hitting the floor and I'm in a seated firing position, right? And my wife and dogs just hear this boom, right? Because I literally have just combat rolled out of bed is exactly what I did from a dead sleep. And Kelly kind of looks at me and she's like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "Yeah." I was like, "I don't know what the hell I was having to get out of the way of." I was like, because that was in my dream and I don't remember, but I had to get the hell out of the way out of something and I did it. And then for me having a dog, right? And I've talked about this on a different episode. I go to lay back down. Finn is trained on distraction and pressure. So what does Finn do? He comes and lays on top of me like a weighted blanket as my heart is just right, so that I can calm back down and try to relax and try to get back to sleep. And it's exactly what you're saying, right? Like, never would Kelly ever have expected to have had a husband who randomly combat rolled out of bed at night.
Yeah.
You know, never did she think to kind of point out to me post first deployment that I had this ritual and routine where I was ready for someone to basically assault the apartment. Right. And yet, it's those things, like you said, like our spouses, whether, it's trauma like you went through, whether it's veterans with deployment trauma, there's no book that has taught our spouses how to be in those moments and how to help us out. I think it's really cool what you said though, which is, if your spouse has that routine, right, and especially if it's not an unhealthy one, let them do that routine to basically like get their body as normalized as it can be to try to get that sleep, right? And I think that's a really cool perspective, and I think that's a really cool point that you brought up that I hadn't really kind of processed through or thought about. I don't even know that Kelly did it, consciously after that first deployment, and I would tell you, like, fast forward, like after, even additional deployments, right? Like it got to a point at one point where, as I was getting close to starting my, kind of my trauma recovery journey, where I would hear a noise, and I didn't have a service dog at that point. I had dogs, but I didn't have a service dog. I was still in service, where I would hear noises and I would literally go clear the entire house. I would go make sure the kids were safe, right? I'd go check both kids' rooms, make sure they were safe. You made sure that the bedroom was safe. I'd go clear the house. I'd go outside the house. I'd go around the house. And I'd even find myself sitting at the top of the stairs for like hours on high alert. And like, who knows what made the noise, right? Yeah. Like it could have been anything. And Kelly never got mad at me. She never yelled at me. She never said like, "Oh no, don't get out of bed." Yeah, exactly. And it's, it's incredible when we're fortunate enough to have a spouse who's that intuitive, right? And then what you said about your spouse, he has his own trauma now because he feels like he failed as the protector, right? Kelly has her own trauma that she's had to work through, not understanding, like, is it something she's doing? Could she have done something different? Like all these different aspects that kind of brought around this, like, as she would describe it, this walking on eggshells feeling, right? And you're right, and then it gets back into what we were talking about earlier, which is going to those classes, going to that therapy, getting that education, like starting to understand, like, okay, this is what's happening, may or may not understand the why, and this is how we can, in a healthy manner, start to kind of work through those things. I'd like to
unpack something real quick. So when going to therapy, please. When this first happened, I went and asked, my HMO folks, I need to talk to somebody. So they put me in with a nurse practitioner, and in behavioral health. And I went and talked to her, and this is probably 2 weeks afterwards. And I said, this is what happened. She goes, what do you expect to get from this? Well, there's some cuss words coming out, because I'm like, how the hell am I supposed to know? What kind of question is that? And she says, well, if you're coming here, you must want, and I go, I've never had this happen to me before. And then I asked, have you ever worked with PTS before? And she says, no, but we did study it in school. And I was like, okay. And so I went to go on and talk about how when I went to the movies with the husband, I come out of the theater and I wasn't expecting it to be dark. I didn't plan ahead ahead in my head that it was going to be dark. So now it's dark and we have to walk to his truck, which is parked where? I can't remember. So I'm panicking. We finally get to the truck and I just flip out. I'm just crying and because I didn't plan in my head enough for that. And then we talked about how I wasn't hungry for days. And so she, at the end of the session, she says, okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to prescribe you some anti-anxiety medication and some depressant medication. And I said, okay, let's talk about why you want to do that. She goes, well, you said when you came out of the theater that you had anxiety. I said, is that within normal limits of this? And she said, yeah. And I said, and she said, and then you said you didn't eat. And I said, is that within normal limits of trauma? And she said, yes. And I said, so why would I take medication and make this journey harder than it's going to be? I have a feeling this is going to be hard. It's not going to be hard on me. It's going to be hard on my family. It's going to be hard on my coworkers. But will this make it harder if I'm trying to do this doped up? I don't want to do it on drugs. I want to figure this out. So we go to leave. Right before I leave, she says, oh, by the way, who did you want to prescribe this medicine, your doctor or ours? And I looked at her and I said, you didn't hear a word I said. And I was so frustrated. So I got to the front desk and she said, oh, by the way, here's a meditation tape. Well, let me tell you what I did with that thing. It was a CD, excuse me. So I hucked that in the trash as soon as I got out the door because it wasn't safe for me to be alone with myself yet. That wasn't going to happen. I was, frickin' meditation. It was the dumbest thing I've ever heard, right? So I get to the desk and I said, I need to see somebody else because this isn't going to work for me. I need to talk to somebody. So they put me in with a med student, or he was a resident. And the resident, next time I went to go see, he said, well, it sounds like you're doing really good and you're navigating everything. So how about we just see you right before you go to court? And I'm like, I don't know when I'm going to court. And so I go back up to the front desk when I get ready to leave. And I said, this isn't working. These two, I need somebody different. Who talks? They said, well, we do have a psychiatrist that is a talking guy, but it will be 3 months before you can get in. And I said, can you write that down on a piece of paper for me? When this date would be. So I called the victim services folks at the district attorney's office who were helping me. And they said, can you write this all up in a letter? And so I wrote it all out, my appointment times, what happened. And they submitted that to the state, and the state was able to get me a therapist that could help me walk through what was going on because my hospital wasn't. Nice. The point with that is not everybody is able to advocate for themselves. Not everybody is able to fight for what they need. When you are in the Army and this physician knows you for 15 minutes, prescribes you with heavy doses of psychotropics, you take that, you get that filled, that's a direct order. You're going to have to take that medication. And so that soldier, is that service member able to tell that physician, I'm drinking beer every night to self-soothe. I'm not going to stop doing that. What's it going to do to this medication? Or I'm getting ready to go downrange. Right. Do I not get to go do my duty because I'm on this medication? They don't open that box and have that dialogue. They don't even say, this has a black box warning on it. If you don't take it this way, this is going to increase your chances of suicide ideation. So we don't have sometimes the voice or the vocabulary to have those tough conversations with physicians because you think physician said this is, he knows best, she knows best. This is what I'm going to end up doing. And I had to fight for getting quality counseling. And I was in that counselor's office for 2 years, just navigating how to be in public and how to be safe around other people, or what's this doing to my kids, and how do I talk to the teachers? And there's a lot of things that you need help with because you don't see it coming until it's right in your lap. And then are you acting or reacting at that point where we're all in reaction mode because my nervous system's shot?
For sure.
And that is one of the things that now I've really dug into in the yoga field is that autonomic nervous system and how it acts and reacts with trauma, not just with things that were hard. There's a difference between that was really hard and this was trauma. And trauma is going to reroute your nervous system and how you view life. Really hard, that sucked. But trauma is just different.
It is, for sure. And I'll give you two thoughts. Kind of want to save the yoga stuff. Oh, there's a good hook. Hey, if you want to hear about the yoga, you're going to have to join us in a future episode after you hit that like and subscribe button right down below. And if you're a veteran, check out ORW Foundation. It's one of the places that helped me out on my journey. They got free retreats for veterans, spouses, couples, and families. So two thoughts kind of want to throw back your direction based on what you said. One is I'm going to give you a story. So my kids were both in no-gi jiu-jitsu, competitive jiu-jitsu, right? And they were getting ready to have a school drill. And my son at the time is in third grade. And so he's like 8, right? And I guess he knew this drill was coming up. It was going to be an active shooter drill. And he comes and finds me. He goes, "Hey, Dad, let me ask you a question." I go, "Sure, what?" And he's like, if there was an active shooter coming into my school, like if you were me, what would you do, right? And I was like, okay. I was like, you got a door in your classroom? He's like, yeah. I was like, okay, 1 or 2. He's like, 1, cool. I was like, you know where the hinges are? And I showed him the door in our house, the hinges. He said, yeah. I said, cool. I said, what I would do is I would stand so that the hinges were next to my shoulder so that when the door opened, no one could see me. And when the person with the gun walks past you, I said, since you already know jiu-jitsu, you should jump on that person's back and put them in a rear naked choke. He was like, cool, got it. I was like, okay. So he goes to school and they go to do the active shooter drill. And Grant, the teacher goes, okay, the drill's starting. Everyone get under your desk. And Grant stands up and walks over to the door and stands on the side so that he can't be seen by the hinges. And the teacher looks at him, and I know this because I got a call from school. And the teacher looks at him and says, what are you doing? And he said, well, I'm going to stand here. And when the person with the gun comes through the door, I'm going to jump on their back and I'm going to choke them out. And the teacher was like, you can't do that. She was like, the drill is you got to get under the desk, right? And he's like, no, that's not what my dad would do. And that's not what I'm going to do. So I get a call from the school and they're like, hey, you can't teach your son this. And I was like, what? I can't teach my son how to survive an active shooter? I was like, what? Like, why can't I teach my son that? And they were like, because, we have protocols and whatever. And I was like, yeah, okay. And I was like, I'm telling you right now, if there's an active shooter, my son gets behind that wall and chokes out that dude with the gun. I said, y'all are going to celebrate him and thank him. I was like, and no one will tell my son he can't do that. My daughter had the same game plan because her and I had that same conversation. It's like, well, what would you do? Right. In fact, my daughter, as I mentioned before, she's awesome. She's a superstar. She had gone so far as to tell all her friends, like, oh, yeah, take your books, get to the side walls. Y'all are going to be throwing books at the person. So she was like, she was ready to organize the whole thing.
And talking through that with them is so what helped keep me alive in that scenario that I was in was those questions with the cop. He said, if the door closes, game's over. Do not let that door shut. And same thing with your kids. You're saying, so they know in advance and they've rehearsed it enough in their heads what they're going to do that they can survive. Yeah, excellent.
Yeah, for sure. Because like you said, right, like so much about that routine, it comes down to that. It comes down to that routine, right? Can you just navigate that routine in those moments to get you through those moments, right? The other thought I had real quick, kind of before we close out this one, is, it's interesting what you said, right? Like a soldier goes and they go talk to a doctor, psychiatrist, psychologist, whatever. They get told something, and in essence, it's an order, right? Whether it's a civilian provider or not, and you're you are held responsible to follow those directions. I will say in my situation, I got blessed and lucky. The first therapist I ever talked to, Wanda is her first name, and a super awesome lady. My sergeant Mike at the time was like, hey man, you need to start chatting with someone. Like, but the way it worked out for me was it was walk down the hallway, doorway was open. I go sit down on the couch. The computer screen got turned off. No notebooks, no notes, no nothing. And that's what allowed me to start to have, like you were saying, that talk therapy, right? Fast forward now in organizations like ORW Foundation, it's a big impactful part of that retreat is veterans talking to veterans and sharing those things that work, right? Like, what are those things that work, right? And it's kind of going back to like how you now are going into those parenting classes, given that example of like, you know, the guy facing the wall and you're yelling, hey, what'd you hear? The individual says, I didn't hear a thing. Exactly. Now let's talk about what works, right? Like having those conversations, those dialogues about what works, right? Us veterans, depending on what our job was, we were all trained to survive and we were all trained to do our job. Like we know whatever that checklist is and we practice it, we rehearsed it time and time again, right? When do we ever get to do that as parents? And when do we ever get to role model that for our kids? And that's like you were saying, right? That's that next step is, okay, now we're learning. Now I can start to put this into practice. And now I can start to kind of see these baby steps of moving forwards, you know, as a parent with my kids, with my spouse, even though we've had this trauma, these experiences, right? Like being able to navigate that with that, like you said, that routine, that plan, you know? Yeah, for sure. Cheryl, this has been really fun. I'm looking forward to having you back on the show again.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on.
Sure.
I just really enjoyed chatting with with you. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And everyone knows John behind the scene, right? He's like, it's like Jay and there you go. It's like Jay and Silent Bob. Like you never hear the dude talk. And then when he does, like, it's like the heavens open up. That was it. That's all we needed. I'm here. Yeah. So on behalf of there you go, bro. On behalf of the Unseen Journey, brought to you by Operation Red Wings Foundation, I'm your host, Guy, with our special guest today, Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you haven't done it already, it was awesome. Reach down there, like and subscribe, drop us a comment. We're having Cheryl back on again. Looking forward to the conversation. And until next time, everybody take care and thank you.